I'm John T. Pierce with Call Center Helper, and welcome to today's webinar, which starts in 10 minutes time. We're going to be looking at customer feedback strategies that you cannot ignore. So very popular topics. I think will tie in quite well, and I think will work nicely. So the webinar is going to be starting in 10 minutes. There is time if you're not already registered for some of our other webinars. We're going to be looking at self-service next Thursday, the 13th of February. So still time to log in there. Delighted to welcome two speakers to the webinar program. Delighted to welcome Jeanette Coulthard from Polestar Coaching. And if you're a very avid reader of Call Center Helper, you'd have seen a few articles that Jeanette has penned in the past, which are actually doing remarkably well in terms of reader numbers, which is very encouraging to see. So welcome, Jeanette.
Thank you, John T.
And delighted to have you on our webinar program. Also delighted to welcome Simon Thorpe from Savio. Welcome, Simon.
Hi, John T. Thank you for having me.
No, it's great to have you here. And Simon's going to be looking at some of the ways that technology, amongst other things, can help with the in terms of customer feedback. And Simon, I think you're going to be at the this event, which is coming up, which is on March 17th. I think that's in London. Which is the Disruption CX event.
That's right. Yes, that's right, John T. It's Disrupt CX. It's going to be at the brewery in London. It's a free-to-attend event, fantastic event with lots of really kind of unique speakers. We've got people from the BBC. We've got people from a kind of whole range of kind of end user insurance businesses. You know, the idea really is to bring people together to talk about what's happening in customer experience, what will be the landscape in the future. So if you've got the time, we'd love to invite you. Okay, wonderful. Well, there's the QR code there. If you can work how a QR code works, you could do that. Alternatively, we are going to be putting the links in the chat room, so you can go in through there. The way to get into the chat room, there's two ways of getting in. You either type in here, callcenterhelper.com/chat, or indeed, if you've got a browser like this, you can just type in cch.chat. It's our speed code, and that will take you straight into the chat room. It's very, very well worth getting into the chat room. Just type cch.chat into your browser, and you can easily get in by selecting here the chat room. You can download the webinar slides. You can do that top right-hand side of the screen, and you can also join the quiz by clicking in here, which I think would be good. So be interested to get you on board. The chat room is in a separate window, so if you'd like to have perhaps the agenda on one side of the screen and the chat room on the other side of the screen, that would be great to do that, and you can do that through the button here on your mobile phone. So that's probably the best way to do it. Just type cch.chat into your browser. There will be a replay of today's webinar available here, and that is available through callcenterhelper.com/recorded webinars. So I could just ask if you could dial into the chat room, and if you could say where you are dialing in from today. So so our speakers today are in, I think, Simon, you're in, is it central London? I'm in sunny London today, yes.
Excellent. Is that on north or south of the river you are there?
We're south of the river.
Excellent. So I think
I'm looking at the river as we speak.
Near to the Oxo Tower, I believe. So
that's right.
And Jeanette, you're in Surrey.
Yes, I'm in Surrey, but actually probably about a mile from the M25 car park, the ring road round London.
Ah, excellent. So Great. So we'll have a look at who else we've got dialing in. We've got Tom, who's dialing in from Salisbury. We've got Barry, who's dialing in from Birmingham. We've got TM, who's dialing in from Rannoch in Virginia. We've got Lisa in Manchester. We've got Jade, who's dialing in from a sunny Newcastle, which is excellent. We've got Charlie, who's in Bristol. We've got Harry, who's in Preston. We've got Johnny in Manchester. And we've got Scott, who is in Reading by the river, so rather nice place to be there. So we're asking a question in the chat room, and that is, what ways do you use to collect customer feedback? Do you use things such as IVR surveys? Do you have focus groups? Do you have text-based surveys? Do you send out emails? Do you have paper surveys? Do you ask people on the phone call? What ways are you using to collect customer feedback currently? So be quite interesting to see what's there. Let's have a look at who else we've got dialing in. We've got Sonia, who's dialing in from Hay, and we've got someone else dialing in from EU, who's dialing in from Slovenia. So quite interesting. So let's have a look at some of the ways that people are using to collect customer feedback. Jade says we're using CSAT and Net Promoter Score surveys. I think Jeanette, you're going to be talking about CSAT and Net Promoter in a short while.
Yeah.
Indeed, so we won't spoil the thunder on there. Johnny says we're using an IVR survey together with tenants events. I'm not sure what a tenants event is. Text survey, paper surveys at events, survey monkeys on email or web chat. I've got it. I think Johnny works for a housing association. So a tenant event is an event with a tenant of a house. So quite a wide range of different surveys there. Harry says also we survey using CSAT and NPS. Tom says post-chat surveys is a key one. Scott says post-call survey offered by the handlers. Do you think there's a danger with a post-call survey offered by the handlers, that it tends to be only the surveys where perhaps the handler feels there's going to be a positive outcome?
Yeah, unless obviously it's part of the process and they have to do it. It's very much more difficult for a customer to give you their feedback if they're actually talking to the person who they're giving the feedback about, unless it's fantastic. So you might find that the feedback's tempered slightly using that method.
Indeed. Charlie says that customer panels can be an interesting idea. And Sonia says telephone calling is a way of surveying people. Simon, is there a danger with telephone calling? You might get a bias that people won't necessarily tell you, everything.
I think you can do. People, in my experience, people tend to give the really bad experience, and they're more likely to do that to a kind of automated mechanism, because we're frighteningly British often in the UK and don't want to give bad news to someone that we're speaking to. But at the same time, there's advantages with telephone surveys, because you can maybe dig into it a bit more and ask some some more leading questions or things that you may not have thought of on a preconceived survey. So I think there's pros and cons.
Indeed. So there's still time to put in a few more things into the chat room if you like. Here's how you get to the chat room. You type in cch.chat into your browser, and if you just like to go to that, or you can, if you're having problems with that, getting that in, just type in callcenterhelper.com/chat, and that will get you through to us. We're asking the question, what ways do you use to collect customer feedback? And we've had a message in from Scott, who says to avoid cherry picking, we audit our advisors to make sure that all relevant calls are offered to have a survey, which is, I guess, one way of getting around that difficulty. And Johnny says we ask people in our initial IVR message, and advisors have to offer this on all calls, which is all part of the call audit process. So I guess that's a good one. He also says one of their KPIs is that 10% of all of their calls must have a survey. So that's quite a high number, isn't it, Simon?
I mean, it depends on how many calls they're offering. I mean, it's important to get to a statistically robust volume so that you can make decisions from it. But there is an awful lot of over-surveying done, and often companies are maybe spending more than they actually have to in terms of the volumes of collected feedback. I mean, coming back to his point about auditing, which is great to hear, I would always recommend trying to automate that process entirely, because fundamentally there will be some impact on perhaps your average handle time or your wrap time in terms of that offer process, and giving a customer the option of opting out from the beginning will also limit your chances of being able to get the most valuable levels of insight.
Indeed. Well, welcome to today's webinar. We've now reached the top of the hour, so I'm delighted to welcome you to the webinar, Customer Feedback Strategies That You Cannot Ignore. Delighted to have with me today two excellent speakers. Delighted to have Jeanette Coulthard from Polestar Coaching with us. From those of you who've read a lot of articles on call center helper, you would have come across a number of Jeanette's articles that she wrote for us probably quite a while ago now. And Jeanette, you've recently started a coaching company called Polestar Coaching. What sort of services do you offer?
Well, I offer a range of services. So for businesses, I can coach around growth and really problem solving and fixing things. For teams, I work with teams to help make them work together better, so that there's synergy and that they actually really unlock their potential to deliver on targets or the strategy. And then with individuals, I work, I've got a special love for job search coaching and helping people find new roles, particularly those who've been made redundant, which they find it extremely difficult sometimes to actually position themselves, and then helping them personal development. So it's really rewarding.
Excellent. And I'm also delighted to welcome Simon to the webinar program. Simon's probably best known as running the top, let me get the words right, top 50 contact centers for customer service program. I think I've got the words right for that one.
You have, Johnson. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
Indeed.
Yes, many years ago now.
Indeed, and Simon is now working with Sabio, and you're going to be talking on customer feedback and also how technology has a role to play.
I am, yes, amongst many things. So Sabio's a contact center and CX technology specialist, but we're very much under the mantra that customer experience should be great all the time. So so I'm going to try and bring some of my my experiences in the customer feedback world to life a little bit later on.
And if you want to meet Simon in person, there is an event, a free to attend event in London on the 17th of March, which is called Sabio's Disrupt CX 2020, which I understand has got some very good speakers, including the BBC, Forrester, and the great and the good of the contact center industry, which would be great. If a little bit of housekeeping, if you want to watch a replay of today's webinar, that will be available later on this afternoon. Normally takes about an hour for us to get uploaded after the webinar is finished. We're carrying on the chat room today alongside the webinar. So it very much suggest, if you can, dial into it. It's just simple. Go to a browser. The easiest way is just type cch.chat. It's a speed dial into your browser or into your mobile phone, and that will log you into the chat room, which I think could work out very nicely. And there's an added advantage of being in there, that we do have a quiz. You can do it through your mobile phone. It is in a separate window, so perhaps have the chat room on one side of the screen, or the webinar slides on the other hand, or if your screen's quite small, go into the chat room on your phone. We do have these voting buttons now. We've got a quiz that we'll have after Jeanette's presentation. So first of all, pay attention while you're watching Jeanette's presentation if you want to get some of the answers, top marks in that. And then we've got these voting buttons, A, B, C, or D. Added also advantage of being in the chat room is you can ask questions and or leave a tip. We have got a prize here. It's a very nice bottle of champagne for the winning tip, or if you prefer a box of chocolates or an Amazon gift card or even a charitable donation, we can arrange that as well for the winning tip. So I'm going to start off with a poll. This isn't in the chat room, this is on the screen. And that is just a simple question. Do you collect enough customer feedback in the contact center? One of the questions I get asked is, how do we get more people responding to our survey? So it'd be interesting to say, do you feel you collect enough customer feedback in the contact center? So I think we've got most people have voted on that now. I'm just going to share the results here. And quite interesting, 28% say yes and 50% say no. Simon, does that surprise you?
No, not really. I don't think so. I mean, I still come across lots of organisations that are struggling because of data. Fundamentally, you know, how to get the right data to be able to then send surveys or you know, solicit some kind of feedback, and that tends to be the key problem. I think that's probably what I was expecting. The not sure is interesting. I think a lot of people still struggle, as I was mentioning before, about what is a statistically robust sample. How much should we be collecting so that we're confident that we're driving change from the right things? But no, I think that's roughly where I thought we'd land.
Well, I'm going to ask the follow-up question I always do when people say, how do I get my survey results, more people filling in the survey? And that is to ask this question here, which is, if a customer leaves negative feedback, particularly in a verbatim box, what do you do with that in your contact center? Do you always contact the customer, go back, see what you can do to improve? Do you usually do that? Do you sometimes do that? Or do you never actually go back and contact the customer? So how frequently do you go back, or does your organization go back to a customer if they leave negative feedback on the organization? And I think this is going to be quite fascinating results. Jeanette, any ideas where you think the results are likely to come out?
I think sometimes contacts the customer might come out top, but I've been in situations where every customer is contacted, and in the last place that I was head of marketing, if our customers left us bad reviews, our CEO would actually ring them personally. So there's one extreme to the other.
Here's the results. You were indeed right. The top answer was sometimes contacts the customer, 31%. 17% of people never contact the customer if there's a negative response. 29% always contact the customer, and 23% usually. So I think one of the things I'm saying, if you haven't got enough customer feedback, are you always contacting the customer if it's negative? Because quite often people just want to score and have this nebulous idea that you'd get a bigger statistical survey for collecting more feedback. I think one of the key takeaways is work on the feedback that you already have. Just a reminder, if you're not already logged in, we are carrying on the conversation in the chat room. Very straightforward. Just go to your browser. I think we've only got about we're less than half of the audience logged in. So just go to a browser or your mobile phone, type in cch.chat, or if you prefer the longer way of doing it, callcenterhelper.com/chat, and then you can go straight in there, and you'll be able to take part in the quiz that we have after Jeanette's presentation. So that's probably a good time to move across to Jeanette now. And Jeanette, if you'd like to share with us your strategies for customer feedback.
Okay, so hopefully, Jonty, I've pressed the right buttons and everybody can actually see the presentation.
We can indeed.
Unfortunately, I can't, so I'm just going to read my slides. Okay, so I think the first few slides of my presentation, everyone, you'll all be very familiar with. If not, then we'll touch on them briefly, but I'll concentrate more towards the latter end of the presentation and give you more information there. So, the importance of customer feedback strategies, well, I think hopefully you will all know those. There's lots of statistics out there in terms of what impact they could have in your business and your profitability, and also, you know, in terms of making it a better place for your customer facing staff to be working. We see, you know, that companies with the highest NPS scores grow 2 times, outgrow their competitors 2 times, highly engaged customers buy more. It all makes common sense. I think most of you will have some form of customer feedback strategy. It just depends on the size of your business, how large it is, and how many areas you cover. The basics, I think most of you will know, but if you're not doing this, it's really key. So there's a model, the ACFA customer feedback model, which starts off with making sure that you ask your customers for feedback. And one added to that is to make sure you're asking for the feedback at different stages of the customer journey. That will give you a view over time of how your customers feel about you and your product and services and the services you deliver through contact center. Categorizing the feedback, really important. If you want to be able to do something positive with the feedback you're getting and have an impact on areas of the business, categorizing it makes it easier to communicate it and distribute it to the right people within the business. So key, another C, although one that I've added in, is making sure you communicate that feedback and then following up with customers, as John T was discussing just before we started. If you don't follow up with your customers and let them know you're listening to you, you may not get feedback in the future. And clearly acting on your feedback that you receive is really important. That demonstrates to your customers that you're actually listening to what they say, and actually allows you to improve the customer experience and ultimately hit the bottom line, because a lot of customer feedback is wrapped up in customer experience, and you need to be able to demonstrate that you have an impact with what you're doing, especially to the senior management within the business. And I think Simon will be talking to you more on that later on. So asking customers for feedback. There's different ways of asking customer feedback. We've seen that with the poll or the question that John T asked earlier on. What we know is that unless you have, as a customer, an amazing or a horrible experience, you're not likely to proactively lead feedback. So asking for it is really important. There's 3 main methods to acquire customer feedback. I think most people will use one or at least 2 of these. That's through customer satisfaction score, the CSAT that you all know, customer effort score, and the Net Promoter Score. Marketing tend to use a Net Promoter Score very frequently, as it gives them a feel of how the product service that you're offering is actually being received and what they can do to improve. And you can use those methods in isolation or together. There are limitations, as they're far more effective at telling you something's good or bad, but not really why. So just to help you here, if you haven't already got CSAT or customer experience or Net Promoter in place, there's very simple questions you can ask as part of the customer journey. For example, CSAT at the end of calls, you know that you can do that via SMS, ask, as somebody else was saying earlier in the chat room, or even send out email. Customer effort score, again, same sort of thing, but much easier to apply in areas where you're dealing maybe with live chats, that kind of thing. And Net Promoter Score is more commonly used at the beginning of the customer's journey, but it should be used throughout the customer's life cycle with you, and tends to be used more in surveys, but you can use it any way you want to. And combine those three will give you a really good feel for how things are going with your customers. But we need to remember that surveys aren't king. There are rich sources of feedback within the contact centre, especially if you're dealing with chat, email, and voice communications from the customer. But there are still other methods that can be looked at. So we've already talked about surveys. You can ask your customers via email. You can ask them during the web chat. There's community groups where you can feed a backup from, using SMS to get feedback, and also monitoring social media. There's so much free feedback that you haven't have to elicit within social media channels. It's really worth looking at. So there are other methods, as I said, and these probably some people will be using and some won't. Particularly, I think I see these methods being used in a lot of startups. So creating a customer panel. This can be run by any area of the business, but contact centres could do this quite well for the rest of the business. So inviting customers to be on a panel makes them feel special, gives you a group of customers who are willing to provide feedback on an ongoing basis. The one thing I know, though, is to check the profile of panelists against the profile of your whole customer base, because what you don't want to do is to find that you've got a skewed panel and you're not really getting the full spectrum of the feedback that you'd be looking to get. So you might have advocates, and it's great to have advocates, but you don't want all your feedback coming from the people who love you. You could also start a community group. I know these are often seen as a little risky, and they can be time consuming to manage, but there are companies out there, particularly in fintech, who use these really well, and they actually create customer ambassadors. So they find selected customers who are willing to act as ambassadors, and they actually let them run the conversations in the groups for them. Be interested to know if any of you out there listening have something similar. Then we've got customer interviews and customer listening sessions. Somebody mentioned that on the chat earlier about ringing customers. I think these two techniques can be used to complement whatever else you're doing, but you shouldn't use them in isolation. Then you have the ability to use Facebook and social media polls. They're great for testing the water. Just to give you an example, as head of marketing for the last company that I worked for, we used a social media poll to choose the names of our products. So we gave a selection of names to our Facebook community, asked them which ones they liked best, and then we chose the name that they liked the best. And then if you've got high street presence or retail outlets, you can use things like mobile beacon surveys, old-fashioned, but you could use feedback cards and also insert a survey within your free Wi-Fi. So as people access the Wi-Fi or leave the Wi-Fi, you could put surveys in there as well. So okay, yes, it's a survey, but it's slightly different. I think it would be more difficult to use those in an environment where you don't have a high street presence, but I'm sure somebody will tell me that found a way. And then, as I said before, get a lot of feedback from customers that isn't necessarily asked for or proactively given. So monitoring your social media channels is a good idea. You can use applications that alert you if your brand name is mentioned, or one of the services or products that you're offering is mentioned, and those can come to you, so you don't have to trawl the social media channels to look. You can review live on web chat transcripts. There'll be lots of customer feedback within those. For example, valuable to the contact centre, looking at what are the theme in the questions that are being asked. Are they the same questions? Is there something that you can do to change your FAQs online, for example, reduce your call volumes? You can analyse your recorded sales service calls. I know that speech analytics software can help you mine this data really easily. It tends to be used much more, or in the environments I worked in, we tended to use it much more to look for where our call's compliant. But from a marketing perspective or an insight perspective, actually looking for, again, things within those calls which you can get a great speech analytics programmer to help pull that information out for you. And then if you've got an online business or an online presence and your customers are coming to your websites online, recording the website visitor session replays is really great. You get click, move, scroll heat maps showing how your customers are using the website, what they're looking at, and that can really help you improve the service and the information that's on your website. And as I said before, these methods can help you avoid survey fatigue, especially if you've got a small customer base. The last company I worked for, we had 660 customers when I started, 4,000 when I left. And that's a small number to keep surveying. So we had to use all of those different methods that I've talked about. I did briefly mention about the timing of when we ask customers for feedback. It's really, I think, key to making sure that you're doing everything to ignore customers and drive loyalty. And you can only do that if you're measuring how they feel about your service and product at different points within the customer life cycle. And you can create maps of CSAT scores or customer effort scores, NPS scores, and other feedback that you get. And it just helps you drive more powerful strategies, whether they're acquisition, customer value growth, loyalty, or retention. And customer value growth, just in case anyone's not sure, what I mean by that is the actual value to the company of that customer and the profitability of that customer to your company. So the first step in having a system in place for categorizing customer feedback, which I mentioned earlier on, is to make sure that you do have something there. It's great if you've got some kind of system that can log everything for you. If you're not at that size, you can do it on spreadsheets, but it's going to be more difficult as you grow. So it's wise to have a scalable system that can cope with growth, and particularly adding categories. There's nothing worse than getting further down the line and finding that you don't have enough subcategories and then try and add them and finding your system doesn't allow you to do that. As I said before, categorizing enables you to get the data to the right person who can actually make sure that action's taken on it. Typically, there are three main categories: product, customer service, marketing and sales. They'll be the main categories, and then you can break those down into subcategories. So let's whiz through product feedbacks. I think that's more related to people who work in marketing, but you want to know if there's any major product flaws or bugs. Typically, if a core feature of your product is accessed online, customers can't access it, you want to get that fixed as soon as you can. For minor product flaws, you may not need to fix that quickly, but you need to do something that can be prioritized. So that could be customers receiving 2 copies of the same email, or even if there's a typo in an email that you're sending out. And then feature requests, really important, especially for your product development team. Making sure that if customers are mentioning that something isn't available that they'd like to have, or there's feedback that's suggesting something might be missing from your tool service, if you get that to the right person, they can build that into the product roadmap. For customer feedback, I'm sure all of you who work in the contact centre will be aware of the different categories that you work with now. For me, I would say it's probably more difficult to categorise customer service related feedback, and it depends on what your organisation is focused on. If it's looking at minimising complaints about your products or services, whether you're looking at reducing call volumes or reducing AHT, or just improving the customer experience, the questions that you're going to be asking are different, the categories that you have in place will be different. And just remember, in some cases, you don't need to ask customers for feedback. It's there, and you can just pick it up and make sure that it's categorised and sent off to the right areas for action. And also, whatever you do, is likely to be able to help you drive down call or chat volumes and reduce your operational costs. So there's benefit there as well. Sales and marketing feedback subcategories. Well, again, it needs careful thought. We want to involve the people in sales and marketing in deciding what categories there are. But just an example, they'll probably want to know, are there any areas in the marketing material, or are people making unrealistic promises? You don't want a salesperson saying that a feature is available when it's not. And you need to get that information back to the right area as soon as possible, and even perhaps to training. And if you want to make sure your customers understand what you're buying and that your product delivers value to them, then you need a category for that. And I think probably you can work out some of your own, working with your own colleagues. The one thing I would caution though is don't go overboard on the number of subcategories. Too much granularity can make it difficult to identify themes that you need to act on quickly. I put granularity in, but just too much information really. You get information overload, especially with the amount of feedback that you probably aren't aware that you've got. And then you've got a really key thing, which is to follow up with your customers. Customers want to know that you're listening to them, that you're going to do something with their feedback. And critically, when you do that, it helps to generate ongoing feedback. You heard me, so I'll continue giving that feedback. And you can give the feedback to the customers in terms of the fact that you're acknowledged them is by thank you emails. Better to be personalised if possible. You could do a standard email that has a personalised top and tail, which is nice. A thank you gift. Some places, companies will give thank you gifts in the form of vouchers, corporate branded items. Like, you know, I know there's always a joke about the pen, but actually if you get a free pen, most people would be happy with that. Some companies, especially ones that are focused online, will use badges of honour and actually they'll have a way that displays in the customer's account, or they'll even invite customers to be an ambassador for them. I mentioned that earlier. There's a company, I think somebody will have heard, called Revolut, and they have customer ambassadors. I think Monzo also does the same thing. Then you could also have a display board on your website, which shows, for example, the new product features that you're developing or the status of those, especially if they come feedback from the customer. And it just, again, gives something to look at, feeling like they're part of your journey. And then you could do shout out in letters or blogs, or display customer reviews and recommendations on your website. Don't forget, you know, if a customer is giving you a great review, you should be proud of that and display it. And that all helps continue a continuous feedback loop with your customers. So acting on feedback is essential. There's no point in gathering the feedback, looking at it and doing things with it and not doing anything with it, sorry. So acting on it's great, but there may be some feedback that you can't act on. For example, I developed a product which is an identity theft protection product. It was designed to protect people from having their ID stolen and people committing financial fraud. We held a customer focus group, and the customers there loved the concept of the product, loved all the features and benefits. He said, I'd love it to do one more thing for me. And he said, I see this as protecting me and my identity. What I'd like, if I was in the middle of a war zone, I'd like you to be able to send in a helicopter and pull me out and take me to safety. Well, clearly our product wasn't designed to do that at all. There was no way we were going to add that feature. Luckily, we were in a face-to-face situation and we could talk to him about it, which we did. And he was quite happy understanding that. Moving on now, we have, you know, make sure you identify preferred formats and frequency for receiving the data from the contact center. So it may be different for each department. Make sure you know who should receive the feedback. and then you can drive the right action. It would be great to have somebody who was responsible for overseeing this process, so somebody who can agree actions to be taken with the relevant people, who's tracking the progress and completion of action, and then monitoring the impact. I was reading an article today talking about customer experience as a profession, and saying that it's coming into difficult because it's hard to demonstrate the impact of the work that customer experience people do. Monitoring the impact in this way will allow that demonstration to happen. So you can actually see in a lot of cases, each action having an impact, whether that's increasing engagement, which will eventually increase profitability of the customer, or actually reducing costs in some areas. And it's really important to demonstrate that to senior management. And finally, what should you do then? If you already have a feedback strategy in place, then kick the tires on it, have a look at it. Does it cover all of the areas? You know, if you have 5 different channels where customers can be providing feedback through voice, web chat, email, social media groups, whatever, make sure you're capturing all of the information that is kind of important to you and important in driving that customer-centric focus, and look at how you can enhance what you've got there already. And then, of course, as any coach will say, you've got to act on that as well. So I'm going to hand you back to Monty now, I think.
Indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed for that. Some great insight. We're going to be jumping across in a short while to do a quiz. So if you're not logged into the chat room, now is the time to do it. Very simple. Just on your you can either type in callcenterhelper.com/chat, or actually we've got this little speed dial. You can just put that straight into the address bar of your browser, and you can go to cch.chat. Just a couple of points from Jeanette's presentation I thought were really good. I love the idea of a customer panel. It's rather nice we don't call them on focus groups, because I found that focus groups do anything other than focus. Reviewing live chat transcripts. I think there's a wealth of information in the live chat transcripts. So it was very fascinating the timing. That if you know the danger is if you're surveying people too early in their lifestyle with the company, you may not be getting to optimum satisfaction levels. So, for instance, if you do it after they've just signed up, they probably haven't got a lot of experience there. The onboarding process can sometimes be a bit problematic, but immediately after that could be a very good time to get peak feedback. And I think, Jeanette, you made a very relevant point there. Customers want to know that you are listening, so it's very important you go back to people. So I think that's a great feedback, great point there, great tip. Customers want to know you are listening, so that's very good. Right, we're going to go across now and we're going to do a quiz. I think most people are logged into the chat room, callcenterhelper.com/chat. Get ready to vote using these buttons A, B, C, D in the chat room. So the first question, in Jeanette's presentation, ACFA, in the customer feedback loop, what does the C stand for in the customer feedback loop? Is it capture, A? Is it B, categorize? Is it C, classify? Or is it D, communicate? So just like to vote on there. What does the C stand for in ACFA? Is it A, capture, B, categorize, C, classify, or D, communicate? Got 26 votes in so far. I think there's a few more coming in, so we're up to 30 there. I'll just give you 2 seconds more to vote on the first question. What does the C stand for in AFCA? Well, the answer, 21 of you got the right answer, which was categorize. According to Jeanette, ACFA stands for ask, categorize, follow up, and act. I think it's a very good an acronym there. Which entrepreneur once said, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning? Was it A, Bill Gates, Was it B, Jeff Bezos? Was it C, Elon Musk? Was it D, Richard Branson? So which entrepreneur once said your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning? So let's have a look at the answers now. And actually, most of you didn't get the right answer there. The right answer was Bill Gates. 10 of you got that right. Bill Gates also once said, we all need people who give us feedback. That's how we improve. I think some very sage advice there. So Sarah's top of the leaderboard so far. Which of the following methods for gathering customer feedback did Jeanette not recommend? Was it A, automated phone calls, B, customer panels, C, monitoring social media, or D, reviewing chat transcripts? Which one did Jeanette not recommend on that list? A, automated phone calls, B, customer panels, C, monitoring social media, or reviewing chat transcripts. Well, the answer I think most of you got there was automated phone calls was not one of the methods recommended. Automated phone calls and to an extent automated emails can be invasive. Does anyone like it to pick up the phone to a robotic voice? Let's have a look. According to TripAdvisor, which of the following companies has the lowest travel rating based on customer reviews? Customer reviews is a great form of customer feedback. Is it A, British Airways, B, EasyJet, C, JetBlue, or is it D, Ryanair? Which of those four had the lowest rating, traveler rating based on customer reviews on TripAdvisor? So the answer, 18 of you got the correct answer, which is Ryanair. Ryanair travelers gave Ryanair just 3 out of 5 points, while JetBlue scored the best out of all the options that we gave there. And the final question, which Hollywood actor once tipped a waiter $4,000 for a bottle of wine, thanking them for great customer service? Was it A, Brad Pitt, B, Leonardo DiCaprio, C, Johnny Depp, or D, Tom Cruise? I think this is customer feedback at an extreme. Let's have a look at which of these stars gave the tip, and most of you got that right. It was the highest answer on there, Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp was filming the movie Public Enemies and spent many an evening in the Chicago steakhouse called Gibson's. On one of his last nights there, he tipped a waiter $4,000 for their excellent service. So it would be rather nice if people did that in contact centres. So let's have a look, and it is Abdul there has actually tipped Sarah to the winner, and we'll be getting a prize from us. We'll be getting in touch with you shortly. So let's just go and have a look at what's been going on in the chat room. Lots of stuff going through there. Johnny said, we listen to and contact anyone from the IVR survey who scores only 1 or 2 out of a maximum of 5. We have a quality coach in our customer service center, about 25 FTEs there, and they contact all the dissatisfied customers as part of their tasks. We've had a question in from Sarah saying, follow up with every instance of feedback is a great idea, but how would a small contact center, for instance, less than 20 agents over all of the platforms, do this efficiently if manpower or person power is limited? Have you got a thought on that, Jeanette?
Yes, I mean, you don't have to have somebody physically do that. So if you're following up, you could have something that's automated as some kind of way of inserting some personalization in it. So, you know, like almost like a mail merge example of a standard document. So you can follow up in that way. You can do the follow up in a general newsletter. So if you can't send or contact every customer that gives feedback immediately, you could do a shout out in newsletters, and even, you know, name some of those customers, like Wendy from Conway or Wendy from Monmouth gave us this feedback. So you can still engage and follow up with those customers. And if you don't have the manpower to do it with every individual one, then do it in a newsletter or a broadcast email.
Indeed, well, I think Jade's answered that one by saying automate where you can. I got a question for Simon. What about evaluating emotion, looking at how the customer feels? Have you got any suggestions on that one, Simon? I think we might have lost Simon's audio there. So,
thank you. I was muted.
Ah,
there we go. Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, to really capture emotion, you have to be using lots of different techniques. You know, you're only going to get so much from your surveys. So, you know, listening to calls, speaking directly to customers is a good way of doing it. You know, there is one benefit actually of the IVR post-contact survey. You know, I appreciate some people don't necessarily like that automated route, but it does give you the opportunity to capture feedback from a customer in their own words, and that sound file that you typically collect can have a huge benefit to be able to hear the emotion in the customer's voice, which is a brilliant thing to have when you're playing to team members to kind of illustrate a point of change, and even more powerful if you need to play out, you know, how disgruntled a customer is to hammer home a point in a board meeting. A sound file can be worth its weight in gold.
I think that's some very sage feedback there. Well, probably a good time now to jump across to Simon. And Simon, if you'd like to share with us your thoughts on customer feedback strategies, so I'll just pass the control across to you there.
Thank you, John T. Well, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone, again. What I wanted to do was share some thoughts to complement Jeanette's fantastic presentation, and really draw out some of my experiences of how companies can use different approaches to make their customer feedback programs more effective. You know, we've talked about lots of different methodologies and ways of going about utilizing customer feedback programs. But what I wanted to share, first of all, just to set the scene, was, you know, there's no doubt at all that the world of customer feedback and the industry as a whole is growing at a rapid pace. There is an awful lot of money being spent on the collection of customer feedback. But what is really interesting to me is that there is very little evidence, or only a small amount of evidence that is out of proportion, that really suggests that companies are really, you know, being able to transform, take real value from their customer feedback programs, quantify it, and so on and so on. And for me, I think there's a number of reasons behind that. You know, I think silos remains an issue, data challenges. You know, I still think leadership is a big problem. I think lots of leaders still say they want customer feedback, but it's very much a tick box exercise rather than being, you know, truly something that's embedded in their culture. And I also think there's still quite a considerable lack of investment, particularly when we talk about the follow-up action and the taking contact with customers to say thank you. All of that sort of thing, companies do struggle with from a resource perspective. But I don't want to focus on those too much today. What I wanted to talk about was something that I think is still a significant problem, and something that I think remains a challenge, certainly in my experience, for most organizations, and that is how do businesses and CX professionals really actively engage with key stakeholders around their business to take that insight and that feedback they've collected and use that to improve. And it's that engagement and ability to influence others that I think a lot of CX professionals, particularly those that are responsible for feedback and insight, really struggle with. And what I've shown on screen here is something that's been coined by a colleague of mine, Alex Barker, called the fragility of enthusiasm. It might sound like a bit of a tongue-in-cheek term, but I think this is very, very common in a lot of organizations that are going about trying to use customer feedback. Is that, they start a program and it's all very exciting at first, and there's lots of attention and people are really enthusiastic about the whole thing. But then you you kind of reach this kind of peak level, and then very quickly, a lot of organizations suddenly realize, oh, hold on a minute, actually changing and using this insight to drive action and drive improvements is going to be really hard. You know, it's going to take a lot of money, it's going to take a lot of time, and people quickly start losing that enthusiasm, and you know, projects start to wane, you start to hit, you know, roadblocks, people challenging data, and so on and so on. So the influencing aspect for me is absolutely crucial, and in some ways more important than the actual collection mechanism itself. And in some instances, you know, programs fail because of that very element. But I think what's more frequently happening, particularly in the UK at the moment, is what I've shown on screen now. This kind of spreadsheet fatigue. And what I mean by that is, too often I see customer feedback people, you know, spending, you know, days on end pulling together feedback insight into pretty pictures and graphs and tabular formats, and it gets emailed out to a stakeholder group, and over time that, you know, slowly drifts down the pile of unopened, unglanced at emails, you know, the engagement's lost, and fundamentally feedback, you know, and insight teams just are left banging the head against a brick wall. So you know, how do we try and tackle that? Well, the first thing I wanted to cover was tactics for influencing key business stakeholders, because I think this is really, really important. I think the first thing that we've all got to be thinking about is storytelling. You know, the art of good storytelling and the ability to relate to others is absolutely crucial. And if I think of, I always think of someone like a Stephen Fry as a brilliant storyteller. You know, someone that can relate to the audience, they can bring things to life, they can, you know, build a sense of anticipation, all those sorts of things. I think that crucially is what feedback and the insight story they're trying to collect. But just to give some kind of practical tips, the first thing that I think people need to think about, and I'd urge everyone to do this as well, is to think about, first of all, who are the key decision makers, people I need to influence, you know, the stakeholders around the business that I need to really rub shoulders with to try and elicit some kind of change or improvement in the business. So map this out, first of all. You know, and it's pretty obvious, you know, if we're looking at the leadership level, you know, we've got to be talking through a financial lens. We've got to be thinking more strategically rather than tactically. You know, our projects need to be aligned to things like corporate objectives and values. You know, without that leadership sponsorship, you know, projects will fundamentally fail. Another thing that people have got to be looking at is stakeholders that we need to influence around the business that may not think about customer experience like we may do. You know, people in, I don't know, billing or repairs or logistics, they may not consider their actions and their team's performance that has an impact on the overall customer journey. So we have to show them what impact that might look like and speak their language so they can understand. I absolutely believe customer feedback and insight, however we've collected that, should form a significant part in our coaching and management structures. And frontline access, which is something I'm going to talk about shortly, I think is an absolutely crucial piece to this puzzle. So once you've laid out who you're going to focus on, I think the next thing you've got to try and do is just do a bit of sanity checking. So think about a 4-step process. And when I used to manage a customer insight program, these were the sorts of things that I'd sit myself into a darkened corner and say, have I ticked the box against these 4 areas? First of which is timely, which I think is still a problem for lots. You know, if it's taken you lots of time to come up with the answer, the insight, because, you know, surveys are coming out too late, or it's taken you days to pore over your transcripts, whatever that might be, if it's not in the here and now, people will question the validity, because fundamentally contact centers change so quickly. It's got to be reliable. So coming back to this statistically robust number, is it statistically confident? Can we guarantee that this problem or this area that we need to solve actually exists? The last thing anyone wants to be is a boy that cried wolf and has shouted about some problem that doesn't really exist. It's got to be compelling. You know, I've seen far too many people chase their tails and looking for feedback that fundamentally doesn't excite anyone in the business. You know, just because you found out 2 or 3% of your callers like Greensleeves as their hold music doesn't mean to say that is a wow piece of insight that anyone's going to do anything with. And it's got to be digestible as well. And this is a key when you're talking about the different stakeholders you want to influence. You know, we need to drop the CX acronyms. We need to stop talking about, you know, flashy research type words like correlation analysis, regression analysis, and be real. You know, we need to give this information to our colleagues and our stakeholders so that they can take immediate action. They get how it impacts them. But fundamentally, for me, to get some kind of common ground and start building some success, you've got to look for some small, quick wins. You know, start small. Don't think your feedback program is going to change the entire direction of the company straight away. Think about small areas that you can make improvements on and link everything back to the financials. That's what will get everyone standing up and paying attention. And just the final thing on this topic, the other thing that I think people forget is personal drivers of those that are trying to be influenced. So people might understand what is driving people in terms of what their business drivers are, what their targets are as a department. But we've also got to think about these people we're trying to influence, these people we're trying to get them to do something or change something. What is their own personal motivations? What means that they'll get their next pay rise or their next bonus? We've got to be thinking through those sorts of lenses. So this is just a quick, you know, crude mock-up of maybe some of the things that might, you know, turn people's lights on or keep people up at night. I'd urge everyone to think about a similar sort of process before they start sharing the insight and tackling people. But fundamentally, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So these kind of generic spreadsheets that go out really, for me, need to change. We've got to be tailoring this insight to the different groups. The next thing I wanted to cover off was the importance of the front line, because for me, this is a worrying trend, actually. I think that more and more marketing teams are controlling feedback programs using all of the different mechanisms that Jeanette talked about. But unfortunately, insight isn't shared as readily these days at the front line. And that, to me, is a big missed opportunity. One, because that, you know, the improvement and you know, operational performance aspect is lost there. But there is also, I believe, a huge motivational factor of sharing that customer insight directly to your front line. And if I explain that, I'm going to use a methodology that that was from a chap called Dan Pink, who talks about intrinsic motivators. And in essence, what he's talking about is, you know, forget things like bonuses and pay and, you know, team nights out. The things that really get frontline staff excited and you know, committing to the cause and getting on the bus, whatever you want to term that, they have to have things like autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Those are the things that really motivate people. So if we break these down, to me, I think this plays perfectly into customer feedback. So if you're talking about mastery, that's all about the desire to improve. And I think fundamentally, frontline call center agents do want to improve, but they don't necessarily always have the culture or the ability to, you know, or the information available to do that. So if you can give customer feedback, real-time customer feedback to them, they can use that to start self-correcting and developing. And I usually see a 10% swing by, you know, giving them a dashboard or something like that to be able to see what's happening. Big impact in terms of removing any kind of subjectivity from your QA process. You know, lots of advantages to be able to link into scorecards. You know, there's still lots of scorecards I see that are purely born out of internal operational KPIs. But surely, you know, what our customers are saying at a CX level, that should be something that we're measuring and sharing as part of a scorecard. And also, coming back to this kind of voice and sound file, you know, for an agent to hear the emotion in a customer's voice, particularly if it's good and it's positive, it can be hugely motivational. Particularly if you've had 40 calls that day that haven't been particularly happy, and someone takes the time to say, "Look, you did a really job well done." That has a big impact. From a purpose perspective, you know, I think this is all about, you know, giving frontline people the ability to see their own contribution to the wider good, the wider business success. So again, feedback can be used to link to company performance scores. voice of the employee type surveys, I don't think we've talked about yet, but a hugely powerful way of understanding, what goes on, what is driving dissatisfaction with your customers. More companies should be tapping into that. And also to identify, who are your top performers, who are consistently delivering great service, and how can we kind of emulate that. Take that DNA and build it back into our training and coaching. The autonomy piece is all about giving people the opportunity to take some control of what they're doing, which is not easy in a contact center environment, but encouraging a culture of, look, my feedback and my scores, whatever that might be, are starting to drop. I want some help. Could you put me through some coaching? Could you give me some guidance? That's powerful. And I'm also seeing a move towards this kind of model office type approach, where small pockets of agency use half the time on the phones, half the time to solve problems. And I think that's a really powerful technique to build culture, to build engagement, and also fundamentally to iron out problems that your advisor community will see all the time, but if you're removed from it, you may not have experienced. So lots of performance improvement opportunities and lots of motivational aspects as well. And this is just a example of it in action. I mean, culturally, people have to embrace customer feedback. If your frontline staff think it's just another stick to beat them up with, if you don't land this in a way that they think it's Big Brother watching them, fundamentally, again, your program will fail. So landing this from a positive cultural perspective is really important. And just finally, and this is really just to reiterate Jeanette's excellent point, this closing the loop piece is so important. It's funny, actually, given the poll that we ran earlier on, I ran a little experiment with my family last year, and I asked them to fill out as many surveys as they could, phone, email, whatever that might be, with one purpose of putting in there, I'm unhappy, I'd like a call, or I'd like someone to contact me. And the results were staggeringly poor, if I'm honest. So 32 surveys completed, 25 generic thank you for your feedback, straight automatic pop-ups, 5 generic we shall investigate and we promise to do some training, even though we haven't told them what was wrong, and only 2 genuine desires to close the loop. Now, that is just a staggering waste of effort and opportunity. And I think, I don't want to paint a negative picture, but I think a lot of the bigger organizations fall into this bracket. I think some of the kind of more SME businesses do understand and are being more proactive in closing the loop. But I think, everyone really needs to be thinking how they can do this, because fundamentally, the experts are saying 11% of churn could be avoided by simple outreach. And just take it from me, because I've lived and breathed this for many years. If you take the time to ring a customer back when they've left you negative feedback, and you say, look, we're really sorry, we got it wrong on this occasion, we'd really like to put it right, they will be floored. They will be absolutely dumbstruck. And it's one of the quickest ways of turning a detractor into a promoter. It's well worth having a go and just seeing the actual sheer surprise and joy in your customer's eyes when you give it a go. So that is just a few points I wanted to share with you. Again, just to reiterate, I'll be sharing some more thoughts at our event on the 17th of March in Disrupt. Everyone is welcome. We'd love you to register. We've got some fantastic speakers, and if you want to hear more, please feel free to get in touch with me directly there. My email address is on the bottom of the screen, my phone number there as well. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Jonty.
Jonty, you're still on mute.
Hopefully I'm back there now. So thank you very much for that indeed, Simon. Some great feedback there. Simon has said that if anyone would like to have a Sabio audit is a free of charge service if you're based in the UK. One of the Sabio team could give you a run through of your feedback strategies and give you some pointers for how that can be approved. If you'd just like to vote on that in the poll now would be good. And some of the comments from Simon I thought were very valid there. The fragility of enthusiasm, how a management team often realizes how hard it becomes and starts to challenge the data. I think that's a very important thing. I love your section there, Simon, when you said hearing the feedback from a customer saying "job well done" is a powerful motivator. I think that's a great takeaway. Another takeaway: 11% of customer churn could be prevented by a simple company outreach. I think some great feedback there. We've got just a couple of things in the chat room we've got time for. Johnny said our coaching team also leads on training, does quality monitoring on all channels and supports the 2 team leaders in terms of quality and satisfaction. Since we've implemented that the role 18 months ago, our customer satisfaction has gone up from 83 to 94%. But we're profit for purpose and satisfaction is the heart of what we do. Mohammed said one of your CSAT questions should measure emotion. Customers will forget what you did, but will never forget how they made them feel. And a couple of interesting bits came through. Bella said we had a quality coaching team, but has since been given back to team leaders of specific teams and has slightly dropped. I think shared there was by Monique, who said team leaders often don't have time for sufficient QM review unless it's part of your KPIs. But unfortunately, we've run out of time for the minute. We've got our own feedback mechanism. I'd just like to say in the chat room in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about the webinar? While you're doing that, I'll announce today's winning tip, and that comes from Harry, who says, changing your scoring system to set something like 1.1 to 9 to ensure accuracy. Some customers tend to score 1 instead of 10 by mistake. Any numbering system is often very difficult because 1 could be bottom of the scale, 1 could also be top of the scale, depending on how your view is it. We've also got a little post-course survey that's 4 questions long, and just like to say thank you very much to our 2 speakers for joining us today. Thank you very much, Jeanette, for joining us.
Very welcome. Very enjoyable and exciting for me for my very first webinar, so thank you.
Wonderful, and thank you, Simon, for joining us as well.
Thanks, John. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks very much, and we'll be back same time next week. Thank you then. Bye-bye.